I don't want no oil, a spoil in my shoreline. I like fish much better than crud. I like birds and things, a-creeping and crawling. Won't trade no more oil for blood. The sun done give us all we need to make this country run. But that black demon oil's got us fussing and fighting, and I do believe it's time we was done. I don't want them nukes run by them kooks who think radioactivity is fun. No more three-headed frogs or kids with leukemia. Nuclear power ain't fit for a dog. The sun done give us all we need to make this country run. But that nuclear power's got us fussing and fighting, and I do believe it's time we was done. No nukes!
Good morning, Toledo, and good afternoon, Columbus, and good afternoon, Bowling Green, and hello to all of you on the internet, wherever and whenever you may be. My name is Joe DeMare, and I am here with my wonderful co-host,
Rebecca Wood.
Yes, and together, Rebecca and I are about to craft an unforgettable hour of radio called For a Green Future. For a Green Future is a show where we talk about ecology and the environment. And we talk about it in the ways that it affects you, your wealth, your health, your happiness, the wealth and health and happiness of your friends and your families and your co-workers and the guys out running the snow plows, guys and women out running the snow plows, and the pets that are dealing with the snow, and basically everybody and everything, because, like it or not, we're all wrapped up together on this wonderful planet called Earth. And we have a wonderful show for you. We're going to just chat for the next few minutes here, and then about quarter after, we're going to hear an interview with Dr. Julia Halo. And she's been a guest on the show before. She's our favorite virologist. And it's going to be kind of we've been doing a lot of interviews with activists lately. So this is kind of a cleanse the palate, pure science kind of interview. So looking forward to that. Then we'll hear from our wonderful, incredible advertisers and patrons. And then Rebecca, what do you have to talk with us about?
In honor of World Snow Day, I am going to talk about snow. It is frozen water and it has physical properties.
Okay, well, that seems very timely.
Yes, you have to give it that.
Yes. And then it's ecological news from around the world. So we've got some pretty big stories for you there in the ecological news segment. But also, hopefully, we're going to hear from you at some point. Because this is a live show, and we welcome your calls at 877-909-1007. That's 877-909-1007, and we will drop everything to talk with you. So here we are, and we have snow on the ground, which is very kind of normal, but of course the snow was actually lower than temperatures were lower than normal this past week or so. And the weather people are saying that in this coming week we're going to get weather that's going to be hotter than normal. In fact, the predictions are 10 to 20 degrees hotter than normal. And so the question is, what is going on? And the way I like to describe it, essentially, as you know, we here at For a Green Future, we call it global warming, not climate change, because taken as a whole, the globe is getting hotter. But essentially, the way I like to describe it is the planet has the chills right now. You know that if you've got a fever, that sometimes, even though your temperature is way above normal, you feel cold and you're shivering and you like wrap yourself in blankets and stuff, even though your temperature is like 101. So that's essentially what we're we're getting right now. The planet has the chills, and so that's going to end this coming week as temperatures swing back from 10 to 20 degrees below normal to 10 to 20 degrees above normal. And of course, don't forget that all of December was incredibly high in terms of above normal temperatures, no freezing. Everything was just gray. And so if you enjoy snow, now's the time to use it. We got to get out there and you've got like one more chance to maybe get your cross-country skis out. But you're not going to hear a lot about this in the news because I've noticed a pattern in the media, and that is we are now fully into the 2024 campaign season in terms of news cycles and what they're reporting on. And I've noticed for many years that once the campaign reporting really gets going, the thing that gets dropped out is environmental reporting. Mm-hmm. So there's this little window after an election where all of a sudden there's just tons of environmental stories. But once elections actually get going and people are campaigning, they don't want environmental issues to be part of this political process. They don't want people thinking about global warming when they're thinking about who to vote for. So you will not hear much in the way of environmental reporting for the next, the next 10 months or so, right?
Yep, something like that. Yeah, because it's all, no, look at this circus over here.
Right.
With the Democrats and the Republicans.
Yep, it's all.
Don't remember about the ecological issues.
Yeah. I was coming in today and I was listening to, there's a talk show radio host named Dean Obadala, and he had some guests on, and he was calling, he said our politics have devolved now into just performance art. And one of the guests on his show said, as an artist, I take offense at that.
Good one.
Yeah. So, but
it's not good art. Nobody said it was good.
Well, that's true. Yeah, he didn't say what quality art.
Good art has something original to say.
True. Yeah, they pretty much just do the retreads on issues to push people's buttons. But that makes our show that much more important because we are not going to stop, obviously, talking about ecology and the environment. And we're going to keep telling you the important stuff that's happening, just as long as we can. But one thing I've said before that I appreciate being able to do on this show, one thing I am glad I have a microphone to honor people that have passed, important environmental fighters. And unfortunately, I learned this past week of two people that I want to mention who recently passed. One is Molly Nichols, unfortunately, and she was somebody who worked with the Sierra Club's Beyond Coal campaign. And we've had her on the show a couple times before. In fact, most recently this past spring, when she organized a protest in the lobby of the Public Utilities Commission of Ohio, calling for them to do what they were required to do, which is do an audit of how the utility companies that are getting money from House Bill 6 are using that money. And,
One is curious.
Yeah. And so they agreed to do it, so we'll see. And I contacted her to get a follow-up on that story because I wanted to see what had happened with it. And that's when she informed me basically that she was in hospice. Apparently for the past 2 years, she's been fighting leiomyosarcoma. And she, we communicated back and forth a little bit. And I was very sorry, of course, to hear that she was in that situation. And then I just found out that, in fact, she had passed back, I believe, on December 30th, right around there. So I'd encourage people to go listen to our interview with her back on, that was in October of 2022, or go back and find the spring show where she was talking about, where she was leading that protest in the PUCO lobby. And she was a very vital person, very committed to the environment, very committed to helping people deal with these huge utility companies that are robbing us, that are bleeding us dry, basically. The other person I wanted to mention today, remember, was a fellow named Don Scherer, and he was at Bowling Green State University. He was an environmental ethicist, and he taught basically philosophy of environmentalism and how when you make decisions, you need to take into account environmental ethics, because so often in our economy, in our world, we just don't do that. Molly was only 82, or was only 42. So, but Don was almost twice her age at 83. So, in a way, it was not so much of a shock that Don has passed, but he was one of those people that I had always meant to get on the show. He was one of those, someday I'm going to do an interview with Don, because he was a great guy. But unfortunately, now that, of course, that can never happen. He had a wind turbine outside his house. He had a nice big wind turbine that supplied most of his house's electricity, so that was cool. In fact, there will be a memorial for him today at Dunn Funeral Home in BG from 1 to 4. So if you're somebody who knew Don, that would be a good time to show up. One of his big quotes is, "Make that sustainable. The grandchildren deserve no less." And he was an author. He wrote a lot of books on environmental ethics. And
sounds very familiar from like the 80s in Bowling Green.
Yeah, he has had a big influence on the local Bowling Green scene for a long time. So
no picture is coming to mind, but the name sounds very familiar.
Wire rim glasses, beard and mustache,
Yeah.
kind of okay. No. Nice guy, very nice guy.
Only a few hundred guys working for BGSU who fit that description.
Good point. Yeah, if you want to find beards and glasses,
it's a great place.
Yeah, go look. Yeah, BGSU faculty is the place to be. All right, so now we're going to head over to our interview with Dr. Julia Halo, and we'll be back live right after that. All right, hello and welcome back to For a Green Future. Could you please just give us your name and your title?
Yes. Hi, Joe. Thanks for having me again. My name is Dr. Julia Halo. I am an associate professor of genetics and biology at Bowling Green State University.
Well, thank you very much for taking the time to talk with us today. And we're going to be talking about retroviruses. And so if you could just remind us what a retrovirus is and how that's different from a regular virus.
So, a regular virus. What would we think of as a regular virus? So like a cold virus,
Sure. Yeah.
maybe the flu. Well, a retrovirus is a unique type of virus, really from many other types of viruses in one unique way, and that is that it inserts a copy of its genome into your own genome. Like you as a host is infected, it inserts permanently a copy of its genome into the host genome, and there's no way of excising it. It becomes a permanent part of the host, and that's a unique feature among retroviruses. And so as part of the host genome, then, that virus genome can be expressed. It is expressed. It is, that information is used to make more components that go into making more viruses, and then they release more viruses that will infect other host cells.
And so when you say puts it into the host virus or the host cells, it actually can be then passed on to subsequent generations, right? The children of the organism that got the virus will have that genome in their own genes.
Yes, this is exactly correct. And this is another really unique features of retroviruses. So I think that most of us have heard of HIV, human immunodeficiency virus. So that is a retrovirus that is infectious to humans. So one individual can be infected with an HIV virus, and it can be then transmitted to another individual. So then that second individual would be infected by that virus. So retroviruses are also able to sometimes infect germline tissues or cells. These are like your baby making cells, like your sperm cells and your egg cells.
Mhm.
And if that happens, exactly what you were stating, that it can be passed from the parent to the offspring. So if a sperm or an egg cell that is infected from an individual should be then fertilized and passed on as offspring, then yes, that would be present in potentially every cell of that offspring. And then it can be passed on through successive generations. And this has happened in our past, and so I can tell you sort of a figure that is representative of that. If you think about our full genome, so each of our genomes, we take any individual, their whole genome is about 3 billion bases, right? So that's a lot of DNA. There's a lot of information there. And of those 3 billion bases, the number that we know now that has been derived from retroviruses over many thousands and even millions of years of evolution is about 8%. So about 8% of you is from viruses.
Yeah, well, I wonder if that will make people feel a little more sympathetic to viruses, knowing that we are actually part virus. It's interesting.
That's an entirely accurate statement. We are part virus. And actually, if you think about out of those 3 billion bases, how many genes that we have about 20,000 genes. And how many, what is that representative of protein making genes? So the genes that actually make the stuff that makes us us. And it's about 1.5%. So really there's more virus in us than there is us in us.
Hmm. Wow. All right. Well, you just published a paper recently, specifically looking at retroviruses in dogs.
Yes, this is correct.
So can you tell us a little bit about that, what you guys found?
Yeah, I can tell you a little bit about this. So it's a really nice little paper, and this is based on some research that is a main research area in my laboratory with my students. And we're very interested in retroviruses of dogs. And so whereas we have humans, we have HIV, everybody kind of knows about HIV, it infects humans and it can be transmitted to other humans. In dogs, we don't know of any infectious retroviruses. So that is very interesting. Cats have multiple retroviruses, so things like feline immunodeficiency virus, FIV, feline leukemia virus, which is FLV. These are all circulating among cats and infecting cats. Mice also have multiple types of retroviruses. They have something called mouse mammary tumor retrovirus, which causes a breast cancer in mice. Murine leukemia virus causes a leukemia in mice. And then avians, birds, also have many retroviruses as well. So I note these because if you think about dogs, right, dogs and wild canids like wolves, coyotes, jackals, all of these animals, we've never been able to detect and definitively prove that there is an infectious retrovirus of them. But whenever you look at mice and cats and birds, these are all natural prey of canids, including domestic dogs. And so you would imagine that it wouldn't be unlikely that dogs or wild canids that would attack mice or cats or birds are being challenged by retroviruses. But for some reason, they don't seem to be infectious to them. And it's even thought by some that maybe they're not able to be infected by retroviruses. So that raises a couple interesting questions. One being, well, how did they get in dogs in the first place? And we have just shown that they definitely have infected dog ancestors in the past. And I'll talk about that in just a moment. The other aspect of that is that, well, if dogs can't be infected by retroviruses, what is stopping it, right? So is there something in resistance mechanisms that we might be able to learn a little bit more about in the dog model system that we might be able to apply in terms of human medicine? So that's the other area of my laboratory that we're looking at.
Mhm.
So we know, though, retroviruses have definitely infected dog ancestors, these being leading to the lineages of things like wolves and coyotes, where we've identified from the germline. So we've taken whole genome sequences. So we have, say, a wolf and a coyote, or a group of wolves, a group of coyotes, and many breed dogs. And we have genome sequences from all of these individuals. And then we can take them and we can search them for, let's say, germline insertions. So retroviruses that infected in the past, like we talked about infected, now baby-making cells of dog ancestors, and were then passed down as permanent components of genomes. And so we can see them in genomes today. So it's a very powerful system. So we looked in genomes of wild canids and in domestic dogs, and we actually found many copies of a type of retrovirus that is now present in domestic dogs and in wild canids. And we can tell from doing sequence-based analysis using those genomes that this virus was infectious among dogs very recently, if not still infectious. So if we take a step back and we look at these different copies that are in the genomes, these represent viruses that were infectious very recently. So we can gain a lot of information about them by looking at their gene sequences. And what we see is that they have many genes that look like they're more or less intact. Like we should be able to just take that gene, clone it into, say, a vector and say, does it do what it's supposed to do? And we've
Does
done
it-
that, and shown that in fact they still have functions. Go ahead.
So does it make, so the question is, would those sections of DNA make a new virus or parts of a new virus?
So that is the question. And we're very interested in this question. So we have been able to now clone. We've cloned, we all know of coronavirus now. We know about COVID. And I think that most members of the audience would have heard of something called the spike protein. The spike protein is this protein on the outside of a coronavirus that allows it to access the cell. So this spike protein would bind to a receptor, a very specific interaction, this receptor on the host cell, and they fuse together. And this gives it access to the host cell. So a retrovirus has the equivalent of that spike protein. We call it an envelope protein, but it's basically the same thing. The envelope protein is there on the virus, and we have a receptor. There's a specific interaction, and the binding between the virus envelope protein and the receptor gives it access to the cell. And it's a very, very specific interaction. So what we've done is from the virus copies that are now present in the genomes of domestic dogs, we've taken that envelope protein and expressed it, and we've identified the receptor and expressed that, and we've shown that that interaction is specific, and we can recapitulate it in cells, in cell culture.
Wow. So you can
It's very
making
cool.
parts of a virus by taking dog DNA, and that's really interesting.
Yeah. So we've focused on the envelope protein so far, and in the paper that we just published, we specifically looked at, is the protein expressed? What type of expressed, meaning you've got a gene, right? So now we have a virus that's part of a genome of a domestic dog. And we say, the genes, we see that they look like they're coding. They look like they actually code for proteins. Can we take just that envelope protein and what are its patterns of expression? Are they expressed in normal tissues of a dog that's sort of just, keeping you company in your own home? And then we also were very interested in looking at their expression in forms of disease, specifically being cancers, tumors of cancers. In humans, we find that human retroviruses that are part of our genomes tend to be upregulated in cancers. And so we were looking for whether there are similar patterns in dog cancers as well. And we did find that if you look at expression patterns of normal tissues, so just healthy tissues, an otherwise healthy dog, we do see that the envelope is expressed. And we also found that in tumors of dog cancers, it is upregulated in expression. Now, the significance of that, we are not sure yet, so we're doing some further work on that, but that was a very interesting finding.
So upregulated just means a lot of it, right?
Yes, and
More than normal. Okay.
Yes, much more than normal. And we did, by measuring tumor expression versus normal tissue expression, it is a significant level of expression.
Interesting. Well, I personally have lost 3 dogs to cancer, sadly. And so the idea that these retroviruses might have something to do with it is kind of interesting to me. So
Yeah.
All right. Well, so what led you down this research path? I mean, what is it about retroviruses that kind of grabbed your attention?
Well, when I was a graduate student at Tufts University in Boston, I was studying with one of the very best retrovirologists that there is. His name is John Coffin. And I became very interested in endogenous retroviruses, these germline copies that are in our genomes in humans. And I was able at the time to have access to what we do call the Thousand Genomes Project. And this was a sequencing effort of global populations of humans where we have whole genome sequences from over 2,500 individuals. And so I was able to take that data and sort of do the same approach, look through it, look through whole genome sequences and say, is there any copies of of a retrovirus that has been a germline copy that we just don't know about yet because it was infectious very recently. And so we don't know about, if you look at a global population, we don't know about all of the variation that's out there in the global population. And so, in fact, we found several additional copies. One of them, for all purposes, I mean, intents and purposes, appears like it has all of its genes look like they're intact. They look like they would be, it looks like it would be an infectious copy. It's been tested further and it's not actually infectious and is due to a very small change in that same gene in the envelope protein. So the envelope protein is the interaction with the envelope protein of any retrovirus, of any virus really, in the host receptor brings on sort of what we call this arms race between the virus and the host, and each of them being constantly evolving and changing, and that allows a virus to escape and gain access to a new host, and vice versa, a host to become resistant to infections from that virus. When I was studying this in humans, I thought that that was a really, really cool study that we had at the time. And I had also read, well, I was also sort of surveying the dog genome that was available at the time. And there were also these reports that came out several years ago now, but there were a few reports that came out that said we've observed infectious retroviruses in the tumors of leukemic dogs or leukogenic dogs. And so I became interested in that. And although those retroviruses that were isolated from the tissues of those dogs that had cancer, so from a tumor of a leukemic dog, they were never recapitulated. They could never just say, we can keep propagating this virus, it is infectious, and the virus would die off. And so those studies weren't really substantiated further. When more dog genome sequences became available, then I started looking a little bit further into them. We discovered, oh, well, dog ancestors have recently been infected by this type of virus, and we have lots and lots of copies of it. And so I thought, well, maybe what's contributing to these observations in dog tumors is actually from expression of the endogenous copies of a retrovirus and not a circulating retrovirus in dogs. And so that's how I really got interested, and that was sort of the root hypothesis of this first paper that we have.
We've really come a long way. I mean, viruses were like first detected only in 1898. And the first image of a virus was less than 100 years ago. It was 1935. Could you talk a little bit about just how far we've come from knowing that if you filter out everything else, this stuff in this liquid will cause disease to where we are now, where we actually not only know what the genes are, but we know what they do and how they work. And maybe just go a little bit further and kind of speculate on where all this knowledge might take us.
Yes, I can. And I think I'm going to come back to retroviruses as an example because we've already talked about they have this unique ability that they can integrate. They can gain germline cells, sperm and egg cells, integrate their genome into it and become a permanent part of a host, and then be spread through generations through a host population. So if we think about that, one thing that I haven't told you, right? So we've talked about the host virus arms race and that between an envelope protein and a receptor protein, they're constantly changing, right? And so there's a dynamic evolutionary process there. When a retrovirus, like something like HIV, is being transmitted throughout a human population from host to host, its rate of mutation is very high. It's actually one of the highest mutation rates of, let's say, an organism that we know of on the planet. So every single time that HIV replicates, there's at least one mutation that is introduced. And if you would sample one full individual, like if you take an individual that's infected with HIV and you sample the virions, the infectious virions from them, what you see is not a lot of similarity, but what you see is it's sort of like a population of viruses that is infecting one individual, owing to the high mutation rate of retroviruses. So that example is just HIV, but all retroviruses have a very high mutation rate. The viruses that were infecting humans in our ancestors in the past millions of years ago, or even a few 100,000 years ago, or dogs a few 100,000 years ago, or even more recently, they were infectious at one point, and they were transmitted between individuals, and they had a higher mutation rate, a very high mutation rate. And so when they infect a germ cell, they automatically are subject to the mutation rate of the host, be it a human or a mouse or a cat or a dog. And it's much, much slower. And so what happens is that we call this paleovirology, which is a really cool title.
Mm-hmm.
And so what we have is also, it is almost like a fossilized set of copies of once infectious viruses that were very quickly and rapidly changing hundreds of thousands of years ago, millions of years ago. But once they infected a host, way down in our ancestors and dog ancestors, they were essentially frozen in time, right? So they've still had changes, but at a very, very low rate following that. So what we get is we get tools, sequence-based tools, that we can use and treat them as sort of like fossils. And then we can sort of look at these fossilized forms of viruses and say, okay, we know now what this infectious virus looked like 100,000 years ago, a million years ago, 10 million years ago. And then we can remake those types of viruses and sort of explore what the process was that led to how they became part of our genome, and in some cases, how they even now contribute to our normal physiology. So that's sort of an example from retroviruses alone. Because they integrate into the germline, they offer a really powerful resource to follow retrovirus evolution over very long scales.
No, that's fascinating. Yeah, so, oh, that's really cool. Is it possible that the dogs integrated a retrovirus that somehow helped fend off other retroviruses, that maybe the most recent addition is why they seem to have so few infectious retroviruses today?
Yes. So
Okay.
I love that you asked that question, and that's a very exciting question, and I'm glad that you noticed something like that. It's one thing that we are precisely interested in showing did happen. And so we have a working hypothesis that a process like that did actually happen. That process being, again, we're going back to the envelope virus and the receptor. We have an envelope virus. We have a retrovirus that has an envelope that has an open reading frame. So it's a gene that is in a virus. The gene appears to be intact. The virus itself is very, very old. And so if you look at the gene, the envelope gene, it's intact. We've shown that it is expressed, and it does produce a protein product. If you look away from that gene in the same virus, there's many, many mutations. It's obviously nothing else is going on with this virus that we can tell just from a first pass at it. So what we think is happening with this particular copy is that the envelope virus is expressed, and we've shown this. This is a common theme of sort of a mechanism of protection or resistance with retroviruses in many other species, including us as humans. This has happened in humans also. So the envelope the envelope protein is expressed, and it's what it will do is the receptor is expressed also. It sort of binds the receptor away and sequesters it, such that it's either not exposed on the cell surface for access of another incoming retrovirus, or it doesn't even get to the cell surface because it's already been bound by that envelope protein within the cell. There's a couple other changes that would maybe accompany an envelope protein like that, but we have some preliminary evidence that yes, there might be something precisely like that going on in dogs.
Wow. Well, that's cool. I mean, evolutionarily, you could see where a predator would that would be a big advantage. So, cool. All right. Well, that's about all the time we've got. Is there anything you'd like to add real quick, or?
No, but thank you so much for having me on again, and it's always a delight.
That's it. Thank you folks so much for listening to that. That was some pretty heavy duty science there. So if you stuck with it, I applaud you. And I just want to mention a couple of things real quick before we hear from our advertisers.
This lady,
go ahead.
This lady scares me. Like, okay, apparently we're all full of ghost viruses.
Yes, yeah, 8% of
Right.
us is viruses from the
I don't
past.
want ghost viruses. They sound scary. I guess
Well,
they're good though.
They must be doing
They're friendly
something.
ghosts. I don't know.
Yeah. Well, like you heard with the dogs, it's possible they're protecting us from other viruses. So
Right.
ghosts on our side. So kind of like the ghosts in the Ghost sitcom. I don't know if you've watched that show.
I have, yeah.
Yeah. So think about those kind of ghosts. So.
I don't know. They're sort of chaotic neutral ghosts. They cause some trouble, and they're trickster ghosts. Yeah, and they solve some problems too.
Yeah. Oh, all
Kinda
in
like these
all, right? Yeah,
viruses.
that's the whole thing. The net effect is
Right.
beneficial, right?
Right.
So, okay. Well, and one other thing I wanted to mention real quick is that this was a deep dive into virology, which is and genetics, but as an ecologist, then you have to then take this part of the whole picture and add it back into the big picture. And I was thinking, this is just me speculating, we know that cats, felines, and dogs hunt the same prey, but they have very different methods. Most cats are solitary. They have a territory that they mark out. And if you have a species, if you have dogs that are resistant to these retroviruses, don't seem to catch them, but cats, we know, catch all kinds of retroviruses. Maybe that susceptibility is one of the reasons they have such different hunting methods. Dogs are very close-knit societies. They live in groups, they hunt in groups. Maybe because they don't get sick the way cats do if you clump them together in big. It is possible. That's just the kind of.
Cats in the wild form colonies, though.
Well, colonies, yeah, but they're not like dogs, which just sort of hang out together in their pack all the
They
time.
don't hunt together. Mostly the females raise their kittens together.
Yeah, and then but like tigers, one
Which
tiger will
actually
have like
spreads parvovirus if you've got multiple litters around. So there's a price to be paid for that too.
Right.
Kittens can die of parvo.
So if they were resistant to viruses, then they might do more of that. So
I've noticed when we're out walking, if my dog sees people or a person and an animal and an animal on opposite sides of the street, she will go crazy because she assumes that they are hunting us together, coming from opposite directions, like like a wolf pack.
I see.
Even though they clearly have no association and don't know each other at all. Poor baby.
Well,
Or a little wolfy brain. Just enough wolf to get in trouble there.
I'm sure
I
there
guess.
must be some biological advantage to paranoia, or
probably.
or dogs, and people wouldn't have so much of it. But anyway, one other thing I wanted to mention real quick, I forgot to mention this. I was originally from Western New York, so speaking of football, I'm a Bills fan. Can't help it, and I just wanted to mention that you might have heard about how the lake effect snow has buried Bill Stadium in 6 to 12 feet of snow. But
you have our snow, we don't want it back.
Right. Some of my friends, are the people they hired. Like 500 people showed up to shovel the stadium out.
Oh, this happened because the basin of the Western Lake Erie is empty, by the way.
All our water got blown over
yeah.
there and then turned into snow and is sitting in Bill Stadium.
You can just walk out on the lake bed now.
Which is another effect of global warming, so tie it back in. The lakes are supposed to be frozen right now, and they're still not frozen, so that's why we are continuing to get lake effect snow. Anyway, all right, so back to our schedule, and so now let's hear from our advertisers.
For a Green Future is also brought to you by the Wood County Park District. The Wood County Park District is a natural resources conservation agency. They protect natural spaces, maintain quality green spaces, provide engaging programming, and they teach people to love and respect nature. They also restore wildlife habitats and lead people on outdoor adventures. Wood County Parks protects natural spaces in Wood County for all to enjoy from 8 a.m. to 30 minutes past sunset every day of the year. There are several ways to get a hold of them and find out what's happening. One is to call them at 419-353-1897. Another is to visit their website, www.wcparks.org. The website again is www.wcparks.org. They are also available on all social media: Instagram, Facebook, Twitter, and many others. Just search for WC Parks. That's the Wood County Park District, and we're very grateful for their support.
Okay, and we are also very grateful to our patrons, and these are wonderful people who've gone to patreon.com, that's Patreon. There they searched for a Green Future, up popped our Patreon page, and they picked a level of monthly membership that matches their budget, so no paying is necessary here. And every month a little bit comes out of their accounts, comes over to us, and that's how we can afford to bring you this show. And so we are extremely grateful to our patrons. Okay, Rebecca, now it's up to you. What are we talking about this week?
Okay, well, today is in fact World Snow Day. Stop cussing at me. It's not my fault. So we're going to talk about snow a little bit. What snow, in fact, is individual ice crystals that grow while suspended in the atmosphere, usually within clouds, and then metamorphose in place and melt, slide, or sublimate away. So this is the part that I wonder. I remember hearing about how hail forms in grade school, about how, so how does it decide it's going to be snow instead of, you think with hail there's got to be more variant in temperature because it's melting and then refreezing over and over to have that effect, right? Whereas, yeah, it's got to be more static with snow, I would think. I don't know. This is all speculation on my part.
Yeah, hail gets carried back up into the top of the clouds and then drop down and then back up, and so hailstones have like layers,
right?
And so snowflakes obviously are one-off, and it's much colder, and they don't do that up and down trip that the hailstones
They're so
do.
fancy they would never withstand it. Yeah,
exactly.
So that makes sense. And then metamorphose in place. Well, snow melts and freezes and subsides and gets packed down. All kinds of stuff happens to snow. And sublimate, I looked up sublimate again just to make sure I understood it. It's when something just turns directly from a solid to a gas. So that's what that is, which I do not remember from grade school. I was lied to. They were withholding information. But yeah, the physical property of snow vary from event to event and sample to sample and time to time. So different snowstorms are going to produce snow with different physical properties. And even within the same snowstorm, you're going to find snow in different patches that has different physical properties. And then, they go and change over time. It's sitting there. It melts and freezes and gets back down and stuff. So there's that. Some of the properties we're talking about would be density, tensile strength, compressive strength, thermal conductivity, dielectric constant. Am I saying that right? I think I am. I practiced it. Anyway, but the melting temperature is always 0 degrees Celsius. So that's handy. At least one thing stays the same. Snowstorms organize and develop by feeding on atmospheric moisture and cold air. So that kind of makes sense. And flakes nucleate around particles of dust and grit, which nucleation is just the process of a liquid or vapor becoming forming a crystal, basically. In this context, it needs something with a little sort of surface roughness to form around, apparently, and then it makes a pretty snowflake. And I really did not get that much into the ecological effects of snow because they are many and varied. Good, bad. You want your snowfall where you want it and not where you don't want it, basically. So many organisms are adapted to snow, or if they get too much snow, they get in trouble and all this stuff. But yeah, for one thing, it affects farming, water available later from the snowpack for farming and making electricity, for starters. And also, it's really important because it builds glaciers. And glaciers basically act as drought protection. They're like a little savings account. When it gets very hot and there's not very much water around, it's all evaporating, then you got the glacier. Except for now, sometimes we don't got the glacier, as in the dwindling glaciers have reduced the water supply in both Southwest Asia and India recently. So yeah, I think you can probably figure it out. The amount of snow affects the amount of water, which is pretty important.
Yeah, absolutely.
Yes.
And yeah, as you say, a lot of species. One species that depends on snow actually are maple trees.
Right.
Because as you talked about a few weeks ago, they like to have the blanket of snow so it's warm underneath so their roots don't freeze.
Makes sense.
And that's how they're able to suck up the water to make the sap that makes the maple syrup.
Right.
So if you like maple syrup, we need snow.
We do.
Okay, well, thank you, Rebecca.
You're welcome.
All right, now on to ecological news. And our first story, turns out wind turbines don't kill birds, but fracking does.
Yep, not really surprised by that, but go ahead.
Yeah, there's a story on December 28th in Environmental Science and Technology Journal, author Eric Kedovich. And what he did is he looked back at 20 years of data in terms of bird counts. And what he found, from 2020 from the year 2000 to the year 2020, and what he found was that the areas that had wind farms come in, there was no change in the bird population. But the areas that had fracking pads come in, the bird population dropped by 15%, which is a pretty significant drop. That's
Wow.
a lot of dead birds, unfortunately.
The first thing that comes into my head is glass windows kill hella birds.
Yeah. Oh, yeah.
I mean, we're not outlawing those because we've decided we need them, basically.
Yeah. In fact,
If you want to protect birds, then, ban skyscrapers or I don't know, maybe just put little owls on them all or something,
there's things you could do. I mean,
Yeah.
especially turn out the lights at night.
Right.
One of the reasons birds crash into buildings is because they leave lights on.
No.
And they just had a big bird kill in Chicago where they left the lights on at a convention center, and
Oops.
like 10,000 birds in one night smacked into the windows and killed themselves.
Wow.
So,
I don't never heard of any windmill. There'd just be
No.
littered everywhere with
Yeah,
dead
windmills-
birds if that happened.
windmills don't do that. And in fact, we're going to have to add fracking to the list of the top 10 things that kill birds.
Oh my
because-
gosh.
Yeah,
Wow.
because the number one human thing that's wiping out birds are domestic cats, and that's about 2 billion a year. The next down is collisions. Get about 1 billion of those. And that includes like cars and buildings and wires. The next is 7.2 million or 72 million or so. That's poisons. That's spraying herbicides and pesticides on your lawn. Cell towers are about 6 million birds a year. Wind turbines are only estimated to be about 250,000, about 230,000 per year.
You remember
So-
TV aerials? They're like still in some places. Like you'll see a house with a random old TV aerial still on its roof. Man, those things were ugly. I
Yeah.
mean, they just were. But we decided we need those too, even though they ruin every single view in the whole world.
Right. Now, we know that birds do, individual birds are killed by turbines, right?
Right.
Because you occasionally find a dead bird at the bottom of a turbine. In Bowling Green, they made a big fuss because there was an eagle that apparently got hit by a turbine blade and killed. But this study is populations, see, because
Right.
birds are killed all the time. It's very
Right.
dangerous. There was an old Disney movie, It's Tough to Be a Bird. There's all kinds of things that happen to you. But the question is, does that reduce the total number of birds?
Right.
And so for the answer with wind turbines is no, it does not. The answer with fracking is yeah, big time. So that's
And
so-
let's face it, occasionally, within a given population of eagles, there's going to be the one that's not as smart as the other eagles.
that's true. In fact, I once was walking in the woods and I found an eagle that had impaled himself on a branch.
Wow.
I didn't see anything else around. It was just this dead eagle with a branch
Oh,
through it.
jeez, poor guy.
So I don't know the story. Maybe got forced there by some other birds. But population-wise, wind turbines are now off the hook because this is the most comprehensive study with the biggest
Yeah.
data set ever, and shows, wind turbines no, fracking yes.
Okay.
Okay, on to our next story. California Public Utilities Commission. Oh, man. Again, they have done it. They've done it again. What they've done this time is they've rejected an appliance program that the utility companies wanted to do this. They wanted to set aside $750 million over 4 years to help finance people switching their houses from gas heat and gas hot water over to heat pumps, which is a great thing. And this would have reduced electric bills because it would have reduced the demand for electricity during the peak times, which is when all the expensive peak power is. And we've seen that all over the world, that once solar panels and heat pumps go in, peak demand disappears. But the Public Utilities Commission said no. And their excuse was that it would raise bills short term, even though long term it would reduce literally everyone's
Like that has
bills.
ever stopped them before. Like they love raising rates.
Right.
Why are they pretending like suddenly they don't like it?
Exactly. They're perfectly
on.
happy to raise rates for subsidizing the nuke plant there, the Diablo Canyon nuke plant. And this has to be taken in with also the fact that they've essentially eliminated rooftop solar in there because they instituted penalties like the ones we have in Bowling Green. And so, take it as a whole, the Public Utilities Commission of California is completely pro-fossil, anti-renewables, and that all falls on Gavin Newsom because he's the guy that put all those anti-environmentalists into that position. Okay, next, here's a story from Renew Economy back on January 16th of this year. And I often complain about this, that back in the old days when headlines were in magazines and newspapers and you had to be kind of sparse with your words, this title is Rooftop Solar Has Key Benefits and One Critical Weakness Over Large-Scale Solar Farms.
Let me guess. The weakness is completely trivial.
Yes.
Not important. Yeah.
It is. That's true.
I saw this. I know how Joe's stories work now.
Well, that was the actual title.
Okay.
And that was in, like I say, in Renew Economy back on the 16th. And what this person did is he did a life cycle study of solar, and he compared rooftop solar to the big solar farms. And there's been an argument that big solar farms are better than rooftop solar because the cost per kilowatt is actually a little lower because you've got the economies of scale going. But what he did is he looked at the energy cost, and it turns out that the energy cost for rooftop solar is much less than, in fact, it's from about 25 to 50% less to put rooftop solar than to build a big farm, because what solar farms need are frameworks. You got to put cement foundations in the ground. You got to put angle iron up and attach the solar panels to them.
Whereas your house is already just sitting there.
Exactly.
Right. Makes
Right.
sense. Okay.
Yeah, houses actually, rooftops supply all that without any additional energy. And so it turns out that the energy payback for solar panels now is less than a year. They've gotten that efficient in producing them. And I remember back, back in the old days, it was like 20 years. It's like, will they ever pay back the energy? They were actually called solar batteries back in the day because you would only manage to get back the amount that you put in them before they got too old. And then it kept dropping. It was 10 years, then 7, then 5, and now it's less than a year. So all we needed to do was start doing it, and then we figured out how to do it more efficiently. So so that's the story. And he specifically looked at Michigan, and he found that people in Michigan, your savings on electric bills are so high that rooftop solar is like a really good investment for you. Okay, next, huge story, Chevron Deference. We've talked about this before, and actually the mainstream media has kind of picked up on this finally. But the Supreme Court heard arguments this past week. Chevron Deference is the policy of letting the experts at agencies, federal agencies like the EPA, like the OSHA, Ohio, Occupational Safety and Health Administration, make decisions where the laws created by Congress aren't exactly spelled out. So, that the law, if a law says, that there will be regulations that protect people's safety when they're driving forklifts, but it doesn't spell out exactly, how big does a brake pedal have to be and what kind of lights do you have to have on it. They leave that up to the experts at the federal agencies. And so that's how Chevron Deference has been working for over 40 years. Well, the Trump appointees to the Supreme Court want to destroy that, because once you get rid of Chevron Deference, you pretty much eliminate the federal agencies as being able to create and enforce any kind of regulations. And it turns out one aspect of this story, you might have heard a lot about Clarence Thomas. He's pretty much owned by the billionaire Harlan Crow. Turns out Neil Gorsuch is pretty much owned by the billionaire Philip Anschutz. He's a billionaire. He regularly takes Neil out to a place called the Eagle's Nest Resort, where they shoot doves. And of course, they might shoot the occasional eagle in there. I mean, if you're shooting birds,
There you go.
and it's one thing to pass, to overturn regulations that protect birds, but sometimes if you really hate birds, you want to just get out there and kill some yourself, individually. But he also, Philip Anschutz also, Neil Gorsuch, sold some property recently, and he made like $500,000 off it. And it was sold to people with strong connections to Philip Anschutz, as in people who work directly for him. And so it's pretty clear that Clarence Thomas, Neil Gorsuch, these Supreme Court justices are owned by these billionaires who don't like any kind of regulation. And so that's why they're trying to overturn Chevron Deference, even though what we want is, we want protection. And the ironic thing is that even though, if he gets his way, Philip Anschutz will make billions more, because now his oil companies will no longer be regulated and he can dump whatever he wants wherever he wants. In reality, he and the rest of us will all be poorer, because there'll be less water for us to drink, less land where we can farm, fewer birds, as we've just discovered. So it's really kind of ironic and sad and just disgusting that these Supreme Court justices are so completely and so blatantly owned by these billionaires and are tearing down our laws just as fast as they can. Okay, and the final story is an example of this, because what will happen once Chevron Deference is eliminated, and I don't see any way that's not going to happen, even though there are calls for Gorsuch and Thomas to recuse themselves from this decision because they're so clearly in the pocket of the billionaires who are going to benefit from it. That's up to them whether they do it or not, and it looks pretty much like they're not going to do it. But an example of what will happen once it's eliminated, it just happened this past month. There's a chemical pesticide called chlorpyrifos. I have trouble with that pronunciation. Anyway, in 2021, the EPA banned it because it causes brain damage. It lowers the IQ in children. It gets in the way of their neurological development. And they're especially susceptible because they eat fruit and lots of bananas and cherries and oranges. And that's what these chlorpyrifos are sprayed on. And it also hurts farm workers. They're dying and having brain damage. And so finally in 2021, after a lot of court battles, the Ninth Circuit Court ordered the EPA to ban it. And the EPA said, finally, yes, thank you, we will ban it. And they did. But then what just happened, and this past month, the Eighth Circuit Court overturned the ban. And neither of the judges in either of those cases are biologists. Neither of them are neurologists. Neither of them have a clue about, the effects of these chemicals on people's brains and whether or not they should be banned. But because increasingly these decisions are being dumped on these judges, we have this back and forth. So if you want to really protect the world, the environment, you keep Chevron Deference. That's it. That's it for this week. Thank you so much for listening. We'll be back next week. This is Joe DeMare.
And Rebecca Wood.
We are signing off.
No. I don't want no oil, a spoil in my shoreline. I like fish much better than crud. I like birds and